Just because my hair is shorter doesn't mean I got it cut. Sometimes I just decide to shower, just so you know. So a couple years ago, I co-created a company called Emerald Scales, where we would take in, rehome, breed, and sell reptiles and amphibians to anywhere and from anywhere in the USA. And although it's definitely not what I would consider a successful company yet, could still flop at any moment, and overall, I still don't make enough to even survive off the company. But with that said, I think I've definitely learned enough to at least get something like this off the ground. So for that reason, I'm going to give you 5 things that I recommend when trying to sell pet reptiles, amphibians, fish, inverts, pretty much any animal. Number 1, figure out a goal, start with one part of that goal, and be clear about that goal. For example, I said Emerald Scales breeds, rehabilitates, takes in, and sells. That's a lot of things. We didn't start doing all that. The only thing we started doing was taking animals in. We didn't focus on selling, we didn't focus on breeding, nothing. All we were doing was taking animals in. And you can learn more about this in another video called How Much Money I've Made Selling Reptiles, where I went over every little detail of what we've done, along with every number of the profit and the expenses and the revenue. And I plan on doing an updated one with that. Spoiler, the numbers are better, thankfully. But at first we did try and breed at the same time of taking animals in and doing a little bit of rehab, but that's just too much for 2 people to do right off the bat. I definitely think it's better to accomplish one skill and get really good at one thing before you start to branch out. So once we started taking animals in that were mostly in good condition, we were then comfortable taking some in that were in worse condition. And then we were finally ready to start selling them because the customer side is completely different. Working with clients is very different with animals, and it's a lot easier to work with animals. And it's hard to work with animals. From there, you can then start to branch out. And then we started attempting some breeding projects, which failed, but we were able to actually spend time on it because the other part was pretty streamlined and we had a pretty good system. So my point is, start with one thing. Once you are confident with that thing, then add another. And also make sure your goal is very clear. I think you should be able to tell someone about your project in one sentence. And my sentence is usually we take in, breed, sell, and rehab reptiles and amphibians to anywhere in the USA. I completely messed up my own sentence, but you can get the idea of what we do very quickly, and you don't want this really complicated thing, because at first I had a lot of trouble kind of describing what we actually do. Even with YouTube, I was like, I make like videos on the internet, and like they're usually about like animals, but like exotic animals that most people don't keep. And like I do care videos with them, and I didn't really know how to describe it. Now I just say I make YouTube videos on reptile stuff, usually. Number 2, you can literally tell I'm reading it off a notepad. Number 2, find your market before you find the animals. What a ton of people do is they take in a bunch of animals, breed a bunch of animals, somehow acquire animals that they're ready to sell, and then they can't get rid of them. They can't offload them because they don't have a market to sell them to. The market is the group of people that are going to be buying from you. And anyone that says I'm going to buy from you should be appreciated, respected, kept in mind, but a sale is not actually a sale until they give you their money and you give them the product and they don't demand their money back. That's what I would consider a sale. Someone saying, oh, I love that, I would totally buy it. That's not at all a sale, and that is not necessarily someone that's actually gonna buy from you. This has definitely happened with me, and I've been that person where someone talks about this project. Like, one that happens a lot is people that say they're gonna write a book. Everyone wants to write a book, and I think that's great to write a book. But I'll be like, yeah, I'll totally buy your book once it's published or out, or like an ebook or whatever, because it's really easy to make books. Anyone can sell a book now, you don't need a publisher. And then the book goes up and I'm like, do I really want to drop 10 to 20 bucks of hard-earned cash on this item? No, probably not. And there's no obligation for me to. And for this reason, that's why it's hard to ensure that you're actually going to be able to start selling animals, because everyone's going to say they're going to buy from you because everyone wants to be supportive. But the moment they have to give up their money, they're not really going to want to. For the most part, I'd say the majority will not actually buy from you. So for that reason, I would recommend that you start small, do very few animals. Like when we started, we had 3 animals for sale. We had a huge announcement and it was just those 3. And even those 3 took a while to sell. And that was a comfortable point where we could sell those and then put more. There was no rush to have tons of inventory. Ideally, your supply and demand will be pretty even, but you don't want a massive amount of supply with very little demand. If you have a ton of demand with little supply, you'll feel a lot of pressure to get as much supply as possible. But I think it's better to play it safe, and you don't want people to impulse buy reptiles. With, say, merchandise, you can get people to impulse buy stuff, and it's great, because if they regret buying it, it's a t-shirt. It's not really the end of the world for any party involved. Do a flash sale, do a limited quantity, do like a late nighttime post so everyone's kind of delusional and don't know how to put their money in the right place. That's fine with non-animals, but when you're working with animals, you don't want those impulse buys, and so that's why I don't think you should stress over the demand if there's more demand than you have supply, because people should hopefully stick around and buy. And those people are usually going to be the good customers that you actually want to deal with, because customers are not always right. Next up, this one is going to sound interesting. Money is more important than the animals. It sounds bad, right? Understandably. The idea behind this, when you hear it, is probably you're not doing it for the animals, you're doing it for the money. But you need money for the animals. And sometimes you have to make decisions that actually do prioritize money over the animals, because if you have such ridiculously high standards that you can't get a single dollar in, and it's to the point where you can't sustain the animals because you have so little money, you might have to make sacrifices. I don't like the word sacrifices because it literally sounds like you're sacrificing an animal, but I'll try and think of some examples behind this idea. I didn't actually think of any in advance. For example, cutting corners. Usually cutting corners is not a good thing. But if you are able to minimize expenses the best you can and maybe sacrifice little things like a little bit of extra space for the animals. Let's take leopard geckos, maybe. Like, I like to keep permanent adult leopard geckos in a 20-gallon enclosure or larger, which is about 30 by 12 by 12 inches. But if you have these massive finalized setups for all these temporary animals, it'll feel really good and it's really satisfying. And we did this for quite a while. But it gets to the point where it's so unsustainable that you're gonna start running out of money and resources, so it really bogs you down and just slows down the whole process. And it also really risks you running out of money and not being able to sustain even the basics for these animals. So something like shrinking these enclosures for temporary animals is not a bad thing. Like rack systems, for example. People often harass people with rack systems. Other people often make fun of those who don't use rack systems because they're just so perfect. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I don't use rack systems for any personal animals, but properly sized tubs, even if they're not what I would keep a permanent animal in, could really benefit with temporary animals. As long as they're healthy and happy, have the basics, and even some enrichment, I think that is perfectly fine if you are keeping animals temporarily, whether that's a few weeks or a few months. But if you were to keep an animal for its whole life, for many years, I think you should try and give it as much enrichment as possible. But minimizing on little things like that, like not the perfect bowl, not the perfect hide, nothing dangerous, nothing sharp that could hurt the animal, but just simple stuff, cheap stuff you can buy in bulk. Using tubs, for example, I've never had problems with using plastic enclosures, and they are so much easier than glass enclosures. They're lightweight, they break less, they're uglier, but they're overall just easier. And that's something I've learned. And now I don't use much glass for the temporary animals. And now the permanent animals are usually in glass enclosures because it's more of a display, something bigger, something fancier. But the temporary, just simple tubs, simple, cheap plastic tubs. They're easier to clean, they're easier to work with, and it saves you money at the same time, which is really important because you need money for these animals. And I have a couple other videos on making money. I have a video on how I made money as a teenager, which is how I saved up the money to actually start this project. So you can check that video out too. Hopefully I remember to put it in the description. My next recommendation is to prioritize your reputation over money. So almost in a way, my list goes reputation, money, animals. Because the money you need for the animals. To make money, you need a good reputation. Examples of this, you need to go out of the way for people, even if your client or your customer is annoying or disrespectful, as long as they can properly care for the animal, which kind of gives a spoiler to my final tip. As long as they are actually the right person for the animal, and even if they aren't the perfect person, you do want to keep a good reputation. You want to go out of your way to put extra time into them. For example, when we had issues with shipping and couldn't ship because of, I think it was too cold, like last year, I did my best to hand deliver as many as possible. This could be a lot of gas money, a lot of time. If you have another job, this time might be taken away from that, or other projects, just in general. And we've had tons of cases where we end up losing a lot of money on a sale just for the sake of satisfying the customer, to get something proper to them, to keep them happy, because one customer can have a lot of effect. The other problem is a lot of customers will still give you a bad reputation, even if you don't think you're in the wrong. And customers, like I said, they're not always right. An example of this is someone who I still see, I just casually stumble upon them on Reddit sometimes, and they complain because we, quote, refuse to give them an animal and refuse to meet up with them in person. There are tons of different examples of criticism that Emerald Scales gets that I don't think is justified. This is just the first that comes to mind because I just saw someone send it to me. And their complaint is that they wanted a corn snake, but we wouldn't sell it to them because we refused to meet up even though they were local to us in North Carolina. No matter how much they pushed us to meet up, we refused, and we were disrespectful and mean, and it was stupid, and we wanted to risk the animal more by shipping it, even though they were in North Carolina too. But as we told them multiple times, the animal was located in New Jersey. We had another location with animals in New Jersey. That's why we didn't do local pickups. And no matter how many times we told this, they just kept spreading misinformation. So that's just a given. It's just something you got to deal with. But at the same time, when you can go out of your way to improve someone's experience, it's definitely worth it because that word spreads, and word of mouth is pretty much the best marketing tactic, especially when you can get people to tell their friends and family about it, because people trust friends and family over advertisements and over online reviews. And that's definitely the best way to gain someone's trust. So even if you lose money, as long as you can afford to lose it, it'll be painful in the moment, but it's worth it for most of the time. But obviously it's case by case. And then finally, please don't do what most sellers do. What probably 90+% of sellers do, probably 99% of sellers do. And that is they simply want to unload the animal from their inventory and they don't care where it goes. Once the animal's gone, it's not their problem. But if we can start to raise the standard of how customers are actually vetted and verified, as we say, the better off it's going to be for everyone. The standards are so low right now. There's no standards. You just go on a site, you click add to cart, you click checkout. I forgot what button it is. And the animal gets shipped to you. Sometimes they don't even look at the weather. I think it's really important to definitely help set this new standard of actually having a little bit of liability on the person buying and make sure they at least know the basics. We've gone through so many different ways of, is this okay? Is this not okay? Where's our standard? How high is the standard? Is it too high or too low? And it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be customers that slip through the cracks, but doing the best you can to at least get the basics, at least make sure they know what species they're getting. And for us, we personally require an enclosure image and basic information, including their diet, their lighting, their heating, their temperatures, and then we can see the rest in the picture, like the substrate, the size of the enclosure, and if they just seem to know what they're talking about. So you could be way more specific. Some people will ask to see like what vet are you using, and they'll ask for references, and then other people won't ask for anything at all. So I'd say give some standards for your animals, because these are animals, they're not merchandise, but I think it's better to do your best and try and verify customers. But keep in mind, it's not going to be perfect, and mistakes are going to be made on every side, and that's simply part of it. But in my opinion, the benefits and the good stuff that comes out of it are worth those rare and occasional not so good experiences. Those are 5 of my tips on what to keep in mind when you're selling pet reptiles, amphibians, or any exotics, especially living animals. So if you find this interesting, I have hours of content I can make on this. Even though, like I said, Emerald Scales is a long ways to go. But until then, I'll try and keep sharing what I know and what might help you. So let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll maybe read them if you're nice. Don't be mean. Also, if you want to support me on Patreon, you can do that. You get early access videos like this one, private Discord server. You can message me directly, and instead of just trying to harass me on Instagram, you'll actually get a response through Patreon messages. And it's also a great way to support me in the videos. So yeah, that's it for this video. I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.